Well, this is the Dean Abbott podcast. My guest tonight for the second time is Giff Lasta, who is a marriage coach for men and author of the upcoming book, The Way of Men with Maids. Welcome back.
Good to see you, Dean. Glad to be back on.
How are things going for you?
They're pretty busy, to be honest. I got a full-time job. I have a sort of a men's, men and relationship coaching business on the side. And then I'm writing this book to high schoolers and college students right now also, and have a family.
I think you formalized your coaching business since we spoke last.
A little bit. It's definitely, we've got about 40 guys in this this online community, and I run regular cohorts. And I even have a guy who's reached out, had a great story, and was trying to start something in his church, and he's kind of become like a TA. So it is definitely becoming a little more streamlined, a little more of an independent thing other than just something cobbled together.
It's interesting. Let's start with Twitter, as we often do here. Just this week, I saw that you and I actually were engaged together a little bit with an anonymous guy on Twitter who typifies so much of the mentality that I see among men. And I wrote it down. Let me just pause here and see if I can read it back to you to capture that mentality that I see so often on among these kind of anonymous Twitter men who sort of complain constantly about women. And
Yes.
I'm sure you'll know who I'm talking about, or the kind of person I'm talking about, as soon as I...
Yeah, see if you can pull it up. I mean, I will say, Dean, definitely there's a lot of men on Twitter that like to complain about women. And I mean, men complaining about women is nothing new, right? But there's a certain, there's a certain, I don't know, what is it? Butthurt quality, that a certain almost like implicit belief that if they whine, things will get better.
Yes, and I don't know if I can find this or not.
Well, you can keep talking about it. I can pull it up if you want.
Well, I don't even know if I put it on Twitter. It's just something I wrote down. I think, here's kind of what I wrote about. I said, when you write about men's growth and development, as I sometimes do, and you probably get it even more than I do, you inevitably get pushback from certain kind of guys who say all the same things. And the script runs like this. You offer a paid service, therefore everything you say is false because grifter. Number two, when that doesn't work, you think men are capable of making decisions and that being a man comes with inherent power and responsibility. Therefore, you are a beta simp and hate men. When that doesn't work, we move on to everybody knows the core of masculinity is a deeply aggrieved sense of powerless victimhood. The fact that you don't know this shows how stupid you are. And then finally, it ends with, you think you're better than me, and that's not fair. That is the script I've been through about 1 million times with these anonymous guys on Twitter.
Well, bless their hearts. I mean, it's what it comes down to with me is there's a certain amount where I'd like to reach some of these guys,
sure,
but I also don't want to waste my time.
But you see the mindset I'm talking about, this sort of coming to life from this extremely disempowered position where nothing is my responsibility. That somehow I am the leader of all my relationships and also nothing is my responsibility.
Yeah, or I mean, if I were to, I think when we talk about responsibility and authority and stuff like that, I immediately think of Rollo Tomasi's, famous quote, right? Like, responsibility without authority is slavery. And the then the move there is, well, until you give me authority, I'm not going to take any responsibility. And so any
Right.
ways that you suffer without me taking responsibility, ha ha ha, serves you right.
Right.
And I'm
But
not,
Rollo is wrong.
yeah, well, you know, my favorite my favorite counter to roll there is from the Bible, right? And
Mhm.
that's in the book of Joseph. You could say, how would you summarize Joseph's life in terms of responsibility, authority, and slavery? He starts in slavery. He
Mm.
takes responsibility despite being in slavery, and he is granted authority. Right.
Sure.
That's the trajectory. And that actually, I mean, not to undermine, you know, how bad actual slavery is, but the idea is that actually taking responsibility is the path to authority. And I know Rollo and all those red pill guys, you know, they've got some sort of societal grievance about this, and you know, feminism's done some serious harm, but they're not leading anywhere that's going anywhere. That's
Well, but even more importantly, I just see lots of men, and I work with lots of men myself, who approach life from a totally disempowered position, even when it has nothing to do with women. So at work, I am just totally helpless and clueless when it comes in regard to my personal desires for my career or mission or goals. I don't know. I just completely powerless. And it's you may be familiar with Jocko Willink and his concept of extreme
extreme
ownership,
ownership, the
right?
the polar opposite of that mindset.
Yes, yes. And so this is why it's so hard, I think, to break through with those guys is because they really, at some level, they worship women, even though they think they hate them. They even though they think they are angry at women or whatever, they actually see women as having much more agency than they see themselves as having. And they see women as having much more power than they see themselves as having. And they sort of look up to women as if women are a kind of vengeful goddess who might strike them down at any moment. And they're all down here on the ground complaining to you and me and everybody else who will listen about how vengeful and capricious and unfair the feminine goddess up there is.
Well,
And
plus she gets sex whenever she wants it.
right, sure, and I don't, and right, and so it's just coming from that position. There's just no way for a man to have any frame in life at all if you're just going to say, well, women are greatly powerful in a way that I could never be.
It's Yeah, I mean, it's strange. There's a lot of, I mean, there's just a lot of resentment fueling it. And as you say, powerlessness. Um, I don't know that I mean, the best way out of it is probably starts with fitness, right? Just like doing some things where you feel yourself gaining some power and some agency and some just, yeah, I don't know, pride in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a Christian word, but you know what I mean. Is a sense of dignity, a sense of,
Sure.
yeah, that I'm actually going somewhere, that I can set goals and I can improve and I can feel the improvement and see it.
But how do you think so many men? I'm sure some of it comes from bad experiences with certain women. But I think a lot of it is kind of a social contagion too. I think we just have a lot of
Yeah.
guys who like read these red pill accounts or whatever, and they just kind of accept that kind of disempowered victimhood position.
It's
And I just don't know how
bizarre.
so many of them get there.
Yeah, it is a bizarre thing because especially yeah, if you look at, I mean, there's kind of the player red pill and then there's the married red pill, right?
Hmm.
And but I think in both of these communities, I have a soft spot in my heart for the red pill guys,
Hmm.
even though they try me, right? They
Sure.
definitely they wear it down over time. But there's something to seeing men trying to workshop and strategize about their problems together that I really like. But the thing is, often say, I mean, take an example that I'm more familiar with, the married red pill. If
Uh-huh.
you look at what actually goes on that subreddit,
Sure.
they're they will call men out for their bullshit. They will not accept any excuses. They'll be, from my vantage point, a little too severe. Though I kind of like it. I kind of like
Sure.
it when they're just like, own your shit, man, and just, but she, shut the fuck up, right? That's like their initial solution for the new guys. They just beat them over the head with, keep your mouth shut and quit emoting all over your woman.
Hmm.
And I love it. But the contrast between that and then like the single red pill, the normal red pill are just trying to, spin as many plates as possible,
Sure.
womanized or whatever. But it still assumes that if you're not succeeding in that, it's on you. And you need to figure things out. And, it's not going to drop in your lap by whining about it. And so it's bizarre to me that you have these communities that have a lot of strategy and a lot of, in their own way, extreme ownership. And then you have this enormous amount of orbiters around these communities
Mm.
and spokesmen, popular spokesmen for them that just preach resentment and victimhood nonstop.
Right.
And you almost wonder, is there even a relationship between the two?
Right. Yes. And I just think that sense of victimhood, which characterizes so many of these guys that pop up on Twitter or whatever, like until you can get past that, there's just that you can't build anything from that position.
No, there's nothing. It's I mean, victimhood doesn't serve anybody, right? It doesn't, it's not a victim mindset doesn't really help anyone, but it's particularly unhelpful for men, right?
Hmm.
If
Hmm.
men
Hmm.
try to, I was seeing something earlier today about male victims of sexual assault or if and some of the guys like Rolo will jump on that. And it's this idea, not that we gotta like downplay when people are actually victims, but a victim playbook does not work for men in that they don't get any of the, if a woman plays by a victim playbook, I've been wronged, I need to be protected, I need to be heard, you need to sympathize with me, all that stuff, like she'll get some traction for that. But a man trying to use that same playbook it almost never serves him. So
Hmm.
even if it's justified, even if, yeah, he's suffered, those aren't the tools that tend to work well for him.
Yes, I think it's important to make a distinction between being a victim. I mean, a man can easily be a victim of a crime. He could be
All
a
sorts of
victim of all kinds of misconduct. So there's a difference between being a victim and having a victim mindset in which, and I maybe the way to say it is that when I say victim mindset, I just mean sort of a reactive, a mindset that's entrenched in both reactivity and passivity, as opposed
Gotcha.
to proactive mindset that says, okay, what do I do next?
Right. No,
Hmm.
there's no question about that. And in fact, that's one of the big things in the Reforged Marriage program I do with
Hmm.
men. That's kind of the initial cornerstone and something guys are often quite resistant to is just owning up and saying, "Hey, the buck stops with me. This is not going to get better unless I make it get better."
How do you get them over that?
Um, well, I mean, one way is that like, would you really want it? If you really think about it, uh, would you want it not to be your fault?
Mm.
Right? Would you
Say
want
more
it?
about that. Why do you say that? Say more.
Because if your bad situation is due to some sort of like inaction on your part or bad action on your part, then The corollary to that is if you change what you do, you might be able to change your situation, aka there's hope. You have agency. You can you can do something about it. Otherwise, it's up to you maybe trying to convince somebody else to do something and they just never have that much skin in the game. So
Mm.
if the ball is in your court, then you got the power to change things. And that can be a very encouraging message, as long as, I mean, sometimes they struggle with it, but when they really sit down and look at it, it's very, very few of them say, yeah, no, I'd want it to be something I totally didn't control and I couldn't change.
Yes, I think another metaphor for it is just that it is very hard for a lot of these guys to make a mindset shift to where they are playing offense.
Mm.
And they're just like always on defense and not doing very well at it.
Yes.
But like it's harder for them to like switch over to how do I score points where
Mm.
scoring points means progressing toward what I want.
Right. And I see that like some of the guys I was coaching just earlier this week, talking about a marriage situation where the wife was just going at him and he's learning how to hold frame. He's learning how not to just immediately react to her and like fight and it blow up. And what the thing is like they're proud of themselves for just not immediately caving for the sake of peace, right?
Sure.
And I'm like, way to go, man. But she might say, "You're a horrible husband," and like the old guy would have been like, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. You're right. I'll get better." And then the new guy's like, "No, I'm not."
Mm,
But the guy with frame is like, "Interesting. Why do you say that, honey?"
right.
Right. Because he doesn't think he's a horrible husband, and her saying that he's a horrible husband didn't immediately change the situation. His opinion of himself stands the same. However, he's interested in why his wife is upset.
So, all right. So let's go to that with that situation. So you've got a husband whose wife is what was the phrase you used? Really going at him, right?
Yeah, just digging
Um,
in.
outside of say like very serious mental illness, personality disorder, in a situation where everyone is kind of more or less within the bandwidth of normalish, right? Of what causes that in a relationship? How does a woman go from in love with you to going at you in a
I mean,
normalish relationship?
normally with women, it's rooted in a kind of anxiety. It's a
Mhm.
sense of she's flailing about wanting to feel something solid and firm. We use these words like frame and containment, and they're helpful. Um, but it's so she's feeling
What's she afraid of? What's the anxiety about?
um, well, anything and everything, but being adrift in the world of bad things in the world, breaking in, and like the kids not being okay, things not being okay, and then like in relation to him, a lot of it can be either explicitly or implicitly screaming for his attention, saying I need something. I mean, she can be completely irrational about the specifics of what she's accusing or railing about or whatever. But at the same time, women will rarely get into that like sustained uh, state where they're doing that all the time if he has provided a strong frame around the home and she feels just really nestled in him.
Well, what's that look like? A strong frame around the home.
Um, I mean, the phrase I like to use, I mean, one of my favorites from Athol K was the captain first officer mindset. So it's the difference between a guy who's just kind of worried about himself and a guy who's the home, his wife, his kids, everything around that he sees as like his thing, his ship to captain, his like an extension of himself. If there's pain in any of it, he feels it, and he owns it. And so if he's doing that, particularly around her, and then in the things that she's concerned about, she can disagree with his actions or decisions or whatnot, and she still feels pretty good compared to the one where he's checked out.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. The first part of your book I noticed is of your upcoming book is about frame and fire.
Mm-hmm.
What is the fire?
The fire, the word I'm using for it is virility, and it's just masculine drive. Yeah, so it keys into sex drive. It keys into status, desire for all types of status, and it's just the thing that men have that propel them forward in life.
Yes, that is so important. And that thing that men have that propels them forward. And lots of guys are out of touch with that, it seems to me.
Yes, I mean, they're in touch with it as far as they know they're really horny, right?
Right.
But in a sense, I really appreciate Mark Kwebbett's perspective on this. I leaned on him a lot when I'm working on the book. Is that when you're taking all of that and you're just like jerking off to porn or something, what you're doing is a lot of times you're suppressing your own desires. You're suppressing your own drives. You're suppressing the knowledge of dissatisfaction in various, what I call in the book, status pursuits, though it's a very wide concept of status. But basically anything where you look and you say, oh, here's a worthy goal. Here's a fight I want to jump into, whether it's financial or moral or physical or whatever you're trying to improve, whatever axis of improvement you want to throw yourself into. If you're like saying, no, I don't want to think about that, I just want to indulge in this fantasy where I'm already the king of the world, then you are actually suppressing your own desires.
Yes, I think that is the case I mean, I wish the guys we were talking about beforehand, right, who were kind of complaining constantly about women, I wish they could take their focus off their belief that women are holding them down and turn toward some other kind of more valuable social critique that would take aim at what forces are basically alienating men from their own desires. Like something is doing that, and I don't know off the top of my head what that is necessarily, but I know it's not a bunch of guys' wives, right? It's something else.
Right.
And
yeah.
Yes, and so give us an example of a man. As I have an example, but I wonder if you have an example of a man whose virility was not diluted in the sense that he's driven forward by something. Like, can you think of an example?
Oh yeah, I mean, one of my Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, that's a good example.
The famous man in the arena quote.
Sure.
Where he's just describing, on the one hand, this critic on the side versus the guy who's in the boxing ring or, running the race or whatever. And the critic sits down and like critiques. And meanwhile, one guy in there gives his all and loses, and another guy gives his all and wins. And from Teddy's perspective, both of those guys in the arena are just way above that critic who's not even jumping in.
Sure.
And so the idea is that, there's something dignified in giving your all, even if you lose.
That Teddy Roosevelt is a good example of like a man driven forward by his own desires inwardly, his own inward engine. The famous example is that after his second term as president, he was running again, and before he gave a speech, someone walked up and shot him, and he went ahead and gave a 90-minute speech. And he opened his speech with something like, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have just been shot, but what I have to say to you today is so important, I can't afford to take time for medical treatment." He had his note cards in the pocket of his shirt, and they stopped the bullet.
Hmm.
But the point is, and I think whatever people want to say about individual policies or whatever, I think we saw a lot of that when President Trump was shot. I think when he stood up and put his fist in the air, I think a lot of people saw a man driven forward by a mission and a desire that we very rarely see.
Yeah, it's compelling. That example that softened a lot of hearts. People who did not think well of Trump were like, well, I can't. You got to hand that moment to him. You just do.
Right, and I think. I do think, like famously, like Mark Zuckerberg, who was in the, very much in the opposite camp for a long time, came out praising Trump for that because like I said, regardless of what you want to say about politics, that moment encapsulated a sort of masculine virtue that we don't see very often.
Right. And then of course, Elon or Jobs, all these guys who are just driven by a sense of mission. And
my example is always Beethoven, who driven by his own terrible misery, right? Became homeless, lived a very miserable life for several years, converted to Catholicism, and went back to composing, but wrote the Ninth Symphony when he was pretty much totally deaf. And he could only write music by basically laying his head on the piano to be able to try to feel the vibrations with whatever his ears would still respond to. But that is an example of a man driven by his own inner intensity to express. Right? Like you're the greatest composer the world had seen, certainly up until that time, and you have something in you that it is easier to compose the Ninth Symphony while deaf than it is to repress that inner fire.
Yeah, no, that is true. And I mean, talk about a just tailor-made impediment to just say what a horrible, tragic victim of a person I am.
Right. He could have gotten on Twitter and been like, "It's unfair that I'm deaf because I could have been something."
It is. I mean, it's horribly unfair that Beethoven was going deaf. Like, my goodness. And yet, I mean, part of this is another insight I got from Mark, and I did put it in the book, is a conception, a view of like sort of spirituality about your engagement with God. And a lot of evangelicals, growing up Christians, just their sense of engagement with God is, I'm going to like sit down and pray, and then God's going to give me the answer. He's going to tell me what to do. And that happens. That is a thing. But a lot of times what God does is he throws stuff at you in life and wants to see how you react to it, how you respond to it. And so God can throw you difficult things, or he can throw you, pave the way for it to make it easy. And then this sort of engagement with God as a man is, how am I going to make use of what I've been given? Granted, the new situation I'm in.
It's funny that you say that. I was just thinking today that so often, the answer to your prayer is what happens.
Right.
That you pray for something, and then whatever happens is the answer.
Yes.
And like you're saying, it becomes this thing where if you have the right mindset, you're looking for a way to sort of make the most out of whatever that is.
Yeah, and that's kind of part of your prayer. It's part of your step in the dance is the action that you offer God. I mean, you take Cain and Abel or whatever's the thing that we offer up to God. Well, that is the fruit. Establish the work of our hands. That's the fruit of our effort and engagement that we offer Him.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, another analogy is one of those, cooking shows, where they say, okay, you have to make a gourmet meal with these 5
Right.
ingredients. And they're like, sometimes they're great things. And sometimes how are they going to come up with anything with that? And actually, it's the ones with the absurd constraints. It's the ones with the absurd constraints where the people shine the most. You think of Beethoven, there was an absurd constraint, and
Right.
that's what gives the story all the drama.
The I think too, and see if you don't what you think of this. I think too that more men than who might want to admit it really live a life where women are centered. That for a lot of men, women are sort of what their life is about. Or because they crave a woman so much, or they want the affirmation of a woman so much, or that their sense of their own capacity for action depends on whether they have a woman. I mean, there's this whole mindset there where women are centered in men's lives in a way that's probably not very helpful.
Well, I mean, there's also a way in which it is natural, right? Because in that women are kind of in what they're attracted to, they're selecting.
Mm-hmm.
There's a woman, how do I put it? Like, particularly for these married guys, like a woman's sort of unconscious libido, her primal libido, is in a sense the voice of nature, right?
Sure.
Like saying, and
Have a baby.
it is judging you, right? It is judging, like, is this is this man something that should be weeded out of the gene pool, or should he carry on, right? And so there is a sense in which there's a part of her that's the voice of reality. But is this more surface level thing where you just want her to sort of audibly, consciously affirm and approve of you, like you never got from your mom or whatever. That is less helpful.
Well, I think what I mean is that there are many men whose lives revolve around the opinions of women instead of around the vocation and mission which they have been given to perform. And maybe that's more clear that a man's life at the core of it has to be about what he believes he's been called to do more so than around getting women to like him.
Yeah, and
Women can't be your mission.
right, and probably the biggest irony, and it's tragic in many ways. It's painful to watch, is guys who are so desperate for that affirmation, and a man who is putting a woman over his mission in life is just like, I'm just going to make you my mission.
Mm-hmm.
Is on a fundamental level, to most women, that is actually repulsive. And so the very thing that he wants, it's what idolatry does, right? You take the very thing and you make it God, and then you lose both your connection to God and even the thing you lose in the end.
Right. Yes. So we've got a few minutes to go here. Tell us about the book that you're working on.
Well, sure. Yeah. So as we talked about the last time we talked, I'm leading a group called Reforge Marriage, focused on guys who, low sex marriages, not really sure how to make things better, running into problems, and I'm taking them through the process that I went through that fixed that for me, but it was very much focused on learning about male-female dynamics and learning about masculinity, learning how to, establish yourself as a man, take ownership of your life, and then of how all of those like attraction triggers work in a marriage and what to do about them. So I've got a local men's group in my church that I'm heavily engaged with, and one of the guys, newer guys in that group, is the youth group leader. And he came and just sort of being part of what I'm doing, he watched the Reforged Marriage material. And he said, Giff, 95% of this stuff my high schoolers need desperately. Like all of this is like will hit them straight in the center. And I mean, the course is about sexuality. It's about what's attractive to women. How do we show up with our wives? How do we flirt with them? How do we seduce them? And yet what that ends up being is such a powerful picture of what they're attracted to in men, which is a guy, really, really taken by his own mission and filled with drive, filled with ownership, all that other stuff. And he just said, they need this. And so I said, well, shoot, do I need to make another video course, something they could show? And he's like, nah. Kids these days are so sick of Zoom calls and video courses that they'll never watch it. They will never watch it. But if you wrote a book and I could hand them a book, they might read it. I said, "What? Isn't that interesting? How the times change." So I said, "Oh, shoot. Well, fine. If you need a book, I'll write you a book. How hard can that be?"
Right.
Turns out it's a lot of work to write a book.
No doubt. I've done it a couple of times.
Yeah, I'm really I'm struck by how different it is than the various essays and stuff that I write, that I can hold it all in my head in one time, versus a book where you just can't. And
yes, and you forget what you said 50 pages ago.
Right, exactly. So, but nevertheless, that's coming out. That should be out by Easter. So you should look. The name of the book is The Way of Men with Maids, Forgotten Christian Wisdom for Becoming a Man Who Wins at Love.
What's the first thing they need to know?
The first thing they need to know, I guess, well, there are five chapters, and they're answering 5 different questions.
Okay.
Questions are, what is a man? What is a woman? Little hat tap to our good friend Matt Walsh, I suppose. But how do I start? How do I lead? And how do I live?
Okay.
So those are so where do you start? You start with what a man is. Like, who am I? How am I designed to flourish? It's like, if you woke up on a desert island and you look at these hands and this body and this mind of yours, and what is this for? How do you use this thing? And even that, just we get into frame, get into virility, get into the relationship between dignity and status, and it's just this really powerful. Especially to me as a Christian, because this book is very much targeted towards a Christian audience. And it's this idea that being a man is a deeply good thing, and your virility, including your sexual fire and your sexual drive, is something to embrace wholeheartedly, which is something that a lot of Christian books have said and denied implicitly all over the place.
How so?
Well,
what are you saying that's different?
One of the things is whether you call being horny lust, right? You call this is the deadly sin of lust. I saw a woman in a bathing suit and got an erection. Oh, sinner that I am, right? Like that's actually how you're designed. That's your physiology. That's how you're designed to work. And as far as, and then I walked and I wanted to look at her. It's like, well, yes, your body has firmware that says that is looking for mating opportunities, and it's running on a very a very low subroutine, and that's not a bad thing. One example I will give you, Dean. Are you? Uh, I will say this generically. I will
Okay.
not get into specific accusations, but I am aware of a camp for young people, sort of church camp that was doing a camp last summer, and they were they were saying, we're really concerned about, these kids come to church camp and they're trying to pair off. They're just trying to girls are wanting to meet boys and boys are wanting to meet girls, distracting them from the message of faith. And
Mm.
so we need to make rules. No boys and girls sharing a bench together.
Mm-hmm.
No boys and girls walking on trails without and these are like high schoolers. And the and it just boggled my mind. This is sort of the antithesis of what I'm doing in this book, because when you're talking about male and female wanting to come together in love and just sort of the stirrings of it
Sure.
as these boys and girls are becoming men and women, what is I could hardly think of something more rich in theological reflection and biblical application and in just opportunity for discipleship. And the leaders of this camp were like, banish it, make it be gone, and
Mm-hmm.
it's wild.
Right. Okay, so that is frame and fire.
Yes. Frame and fire. What is a man? Frame and fire. So fire being the drive that a man has that encompasses his sex life, his pursuit of status. The sort of the relationship with God in God's sort of abundance and fruitfulness and God's glory. There's a similar relationship in men between our sexual fruitfulness and our status, right? That is something where it's the heroes, it's the ones who are demonstrating a lot of drive and going out there and slaying the dragon, that gets the princess. And
I,
so these are related.
I would say just like what you're saying about men's sex drive. I really think too that we suffer culturally because we have so much shamed men's status drive.
Mm,
I think there is I think men have a deep need to engage in that process,
right.
and it's sort of considered bad in a weird way.
Yes.
Unless maybe you're in the corporate world, maybe there it's okay. Maybe if you're a professional athlete, it's okay. But
But in
outside
the
of
church,
that,
it's especially in the church, it's considered, and there's a lot of sleight of hand going on, but it's considered a source of pride. And I even went through in one of the parts of the book. I don't have it up in front of me, but I went through the Psalms looking at the various types of status that is
Mhm,
just on the psalmist's heart in his prayer.
mhm.
It's like, with my God, I can bend a bow of bronze, right? I have physical strength, wealth and riches are in his house. Speaking of a righteous man, he's looking at financial status. And there's just this thing after thing after thing that are like, oh, this is worldly stuff, is deep at the heart of the prayers of the Psalms and integrated with their longing for God's glory and his righteousness and the rising the rising position of Israel and the flourishing of the country and all that those other things. So
Mhm.
they're related, and it's not. There's certainly avenues for pride and for just cruelty and callousness and sin and aggression where you're tearing other people down.
Mhm.
There's plenty of opportunity for sin, but there's plenty of opportunity for sin in being
Passive.
inactive, passive, and sanctimonious.
Right. Right. Um, okay, so tell us if you had to put the book into, let's say, a few sentences, what would you say?
Mm, I should get better at this.
Well, this is your chance.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote some stuff in the, so I'd say that to be, all right, I'll summarize it. So to be a man is to shepherd your virility, to shepherd your masculine drive in a strong frame, which is the structure you're building with your life, that you hold to, your vocation and everything else. And then you encounter a woman and you see where her power lies, and a lot of the ways in which, ton of ways that she's the same as you, but then some key ways that she's different. And you key in those differences that her power is seated in a lot of vulnerability. And what she's looking for to unlock her power, particularly reproductive sexual power, is to get nestled in your frame. And so then when we go on to how do I start, how do I date? Well, a lot of what that is it's putting your frame out there and inviting her to step into it and see how she likes it. And there's a dance that goes back and forth. There's a way that you do that by being, very unapologetic and firm and decisive in the way you engage, and then pulling back to make space for her agency. So that's different than what a lot of guys do, where they just sort of hover if they're interested.
Right. Because they're the ones who are kind of, like I was saying, they've centered her approval, so they hover because they're anxious. Right.
Okay? Rather than inviting her into your frame. And then the fourth chapter is, okay, granted she's come and stepped into my frame. Well, what do I do with this woman? Like, how do I lead her? And leading is not the wrong word, even though it's controversial. But it's so interesting to me that, well, let me just continue to summarize. I've got an interesting point on that, how this differs from a lot of Christian takes on male leadership in marriage. But we go into, what does it mean to lead? And we use our own leadership of kind of our primal mind, the seat of our own virility, that like voracious animal-like part of us that has all those drives. We need to learn that, how to lead that, or we're going to make a wreck of everything. And the same skill set that it takes to lead that well and sympathetically transfers to leading the woman in our life. So that's the chapter on leadership. And then chapter 5, how do I live, focuses especially, just zeroes in very, very closely on sexuality, on sexual transmutation, meaning how do you take your sex drive and channel it into your status drive? And then looking especially at all the sexual sin and about how sexual sin is like very specifically designed to sap your fire and compromise your mission. And then,
that's very good.
And then we bring it, and so bringing it back into mission brings it back to frame.
Very good. And when's it coming out?
Be out by Easter, on my honor.
Where can it be gotten?
I'm gonna just through Amazon. It's gonna be self-published, so you'll be able to have a copy in your hands, and it'll look good because I've even got an artist working on it, on chapter-facing illustrations and cover illustrations and everything, and so we're gonna get that out. I'm going to go into a cave next week.
And if people want more from you, do they find you on Twitter or elsewhere?
Yeah, on the good old X platform, Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, Giff Lasta, no spaces. That's where they find me.
All right. Thank you very much.
Well, always good to talk to you, Dean.
All right. We'll talk soon.